The Constitution has been burned. I'm not one to mince words, and I think it's critically important we focus on exactly what's happened. I'm watching what's going on, and the government overreach keeps getting bigger and bigger, and now they're blatantly just ignoring the Constitution. I'm going to talk about the latest development, what the CDC has done in the housing space, and why I believe it is the clearest violation of constitutional rights, yet blatantly goes against the U.S. Constitution and opens up a whole host of issues for us going forward. We've seen a lot of constitutional encroachments in the past, but this one I believe is in a class of its own. I believe it's bigger and more sweeping than anything we've seen before. So we're going to jump into that today. For those of you, I know many of you know who I am. For those who haven't had a chance to meet me yet, I am Shawn McBride. I am a corporate lawyer by training, and I am a fighter for freedom. I'm the president of the American Freedom Information Institute, Inc., which is a nonprofit 501c4 dedicated to getting information out about freedom issues. And it's critically important we focus right now on what's happening to the U.S. Constitution. U.S. Constitution, as we know, is the bedrock of our U.S. governmental system, right? Everything builds from that. We, the people, if you read the Declaration of Independence, gave the power to the government. The government then formed the U.S. Constitution based on our willful giving of the power to them. And then from there, we gave them the power to write laws within the framework of the Constitution. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. We're going to start with the CDC guidance and what happened, and then we'll get into why it is so shocking and why the constitutional analysis is so critical. As always, being a lawyer, I have to give you a disclaimer. Not legal advice. This is my opinion. If you need advice, consult your counsel. But let's jump into it here. I'm going to turn the screen share on for you guys so you can see exactly what I'm seeing, and we're going to go through a few documents together here. So let's jump into it here. Let me get over to the CDC's tab here, and we'll jump into it. Okay, so here we are. This is the CDC. This is the article on CNBC about the CDC's overreach, right? And it basically says the CDC has moved to stop evictions in the U.S. And basically, the gist of this is for many people, if you got a stimulus check, etc., you basically send a letter to your landlord and say, I can't pay my rent. And then the landlord can't collect rent from you. Meanwhile, the landlord is still legally obligated to pay the mortgage, provide air conditioning, insure. He's going to have to insure, he or she's going to have to insure the building because they don't want to lose the building. They're going to be legally obligated to keep you connected to electric, right? So the landlord has to do all the work and all the expenses, but they have no income. So this is a huge grab of property, right? So we would hope that this would be constitutional. So we're going to jump to our U.S. Constitution because that is the framework. As we discussed in the beginning of this video, the U.S. Constitution sets the limitations of the U.S. government's use of power. And here we're looking at the U.S. Constitution. It's coming from constitution.congress.gov. So we always like to look for reliable sources here. We've zoomed to Article 1, Section 8. So if you've been in the Constitution a lot, like I have, you start to understand what some of the sections are. Article 1, Section 8 sets the limitations of the U.S. Congress. And the U.S. government to govern, generally set laws, is set forth in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8 is actually quite limited in scope. The U.S. government only has so much power as set forth here. And so we can see Congress can have the power to lay and collect taxes to provide for the common welfare. They can borrow money. They can regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. We'll be back to Clause 3 here in the near future. Clause 4, rules of nationalization and uniform bankruptcy. Coin money, set the value thereof. Fix the standards of weights and measurement. Provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and coin of the United States. Establish post office. promote science by giving copyrights, essentially, patents and copyrights. Create courts, define piracies and felonies on the high seas and offenses against the nation, declare war, raise and support armies, provide for a navy, to make rules of government and regulation of the land and naval forces, provide for calling the militia, organizing armies, legislation for Washington, D.C., and then legislation to support this, right? So this is all the U.S. government can do. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 became very important because it's what they call the Commerce Clause, which allows, this short phrase here, says the U.S. Congress can regulate commerce among the several states. And for those of you that have been following the U.S. Constitution, that is what we call a Commerce Clause, and that has become a very powerful piece of legislation because so much falls into interstate commerce among the several states. And this has been stretched and stretched and stretched for years, and it's going to become very relevant to our analysis of the CDC's action and the burning of the Constitution. So we're going to jump into that in just a second, but we need to have that grounding of where we're at. So this is all they can do is regulate commerce. So let's jump to what's happened, right? So the CDC has said people cannot collect rent from their tenants, right? There's nowhere else this could even arguably fall under the U.S. Constitution other than Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause. It's got to be commerce if Congress is going to do it. But we have an order of an agency, not even an act of Congress, right? It's an agency saying that they're going to jump into commercial, activity, which isn't even necessarily commerce, right? And it's certainly not commerce among the several states, right? Somebody paying rent to a landlord is not going to be commerce among the several states. Indeed, over those, handful of properties throughout the United States that are physically in 2 states, but most states are in most pieces of property are in a single state. So let's zoom to the authority for this, and the authority for the CDC that has been cited to do this moratorium of rent is supposed to be grounded in 24 CFR, and it's section 70.2, 42 CFR 70.2. Apologize for that typo as I was prepping here. Let's get to the right section. I read this last night and typed in the wrong thing this morning. So measures in the event of inadequate local control. So if there is not adequate local control of a disease or virus, and we can argue all day about that right now, given where coronavirus is, the director of the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, our CDC, can then potentially take measures to prevent the spread of diseases as he or she deems reasonably necessary, including inspection, fumigation, disinfection, sanitation, pest extermination, and disturbance. Nothing in here talks about moratoriums of rent, right? It does talk about other things. It is broad. It is statutory authority theoretically picks up the ability to do a lot because it says as they determine. But the issue is, again, let's go back to the Constitution. It has to be commerce. What is the interstate commerce? Where is the interstate commerce here? Right? There is no interstate commerce in disease control and prevention, right? It is something that's happening within the states, not necessarily among the states. Further, what's the commercial connection? We're talking about public health. We're talking about keeping people well. It is a long stretch to stretch this into commercial activity. So What has happened here is obviously our leaders have completely ignored the U.S. Constitution. And we're seeing more and more of this, right? The argument is that we have an emergency, therefore, we, the government, can really do whatever the hell we feel like because everybody has to come along with us, right? We're just all powerful. When the framers wrote the U.S. Constitution, which was very carefully written, right? I mean, this thing was a highly negotiated document, and certainly less than perfect. But these 13 states that really didn't like each other came together and said, we have to form a constitution. If you want to dig into some of the fractures between the 13 states, there's a book called Cousins Wars. There was a tabletop book or an airport book called American Nations, which I enjoyed some time ago. And after I read it, I mentioned it to somebody who was deep in politics, a guy named Dan Morinoff in Texas. And he said, go get Cousins Wars. And Cousins Wars big. I mean, we're talking about 900 pages of a large book, a large size layout. But Cousins War talks about how the 13 colonies came together and they really didn't like each other. They had to deal with each other. They had very different political philosophies, but they really didn't like what the king was doing to the U.S. So they said, let's come together, us 13 colonies. Let's expel the King of England and let's make what happen. Make what we have to do to protect this country. So 13 colonies came together. They expelled the King of England, and they had this very carefully written constitution, which balanced the power among those 13 states, limited the power of the federal government, which is what we see in Article 1, Section 8, and also provided that there would be all these checks and balances. Well, here we are, because coronavirus has come. Everybody wants to burn all these checks and balances. It was never intended to be. The idea was that if there was an emergency, the U.S. government would in turn go back and have an act of Congress, right? Congress would meet and Congress would change the law and the president would sign off on it. That's the way they envisioned emergencies being dealt with. If something was extra constitutional, if it was beyond the Constitution, there is amendment provisions, which we've used many times here in the U.S., now counting 28 amendments. We've gone and said, let's change this thing and come up with something different, right? So the founders envisioned that the Constitution may have to change and evolve. But rather than do all that work, people are just laying things down by decree. Let's talk about why the CDC thing is so important and why I'm caught up on it. It fundamentally alters property rights. They've essentially taken property from all these landowners, right? You can no longer collect rent. Still legally obligated to serve the property, right? If you don't provide access to air conditioning in certain states, heat, water, all the basic necessities, you're going to get your butt sued. And you're going to have to pay the mortgage on that property. And meanwhile, your tenant can sit in there for free as long as they sign a paper telling you that they can't pay the rent. So this essentially destroys the concept of owning a piece of property for real estate holders. And where else does it go, right? I mean, they can just take if you own a house that you're renting out, it's just now basically commanded by the government. They've been doing this with people's businesses in the event of safety. We are seeing now that the government, and this is bipartisan, this is not this is not something that's an entity of one party or the other. They will just take whatever they want and let you deal with the consequences. And it really destroys the whole concept of America, which is we own the things we own. We give the power to government. The government's there to secure the blessings of liberty for us and protect us. It's time we get really aware, folks. Our government is burning the Constitution. I don't even know if it matters anymore. As a lawyer, I say, why are we even teaching constitutional law in law school? Why are we testing for it on the bar exam? Because it's clear our government officials just don't care what's written on that piece of paper. They are supposed to support and defend the Constitution. How this got passed through the government and enacted shocks me. And I'm sure perhaps the courts will disagree, but this tears apart the notion of having constitutional protections. And it is a terrible precedent for our future. This means essentially at any point, if the government wants to ignore the Constitution, they can, because they have been, And now it's just gotten more blatant. With the CDC's action, it has gone to a whole new level. There is no notion of interstate commerce here. It is a very indirect and tenuous connection to interstate commerce that they have not drawn out. They have not spelled out in the legislation. The law should be removed on its face because it does not fit within the Commerce Clause. It is clearly unconstitutional power, should be removed. Could Congress come back perhaps and write something tied to interstate commerce that deals with disease prevention? Maybe. They didn't do it. So we have to protect our constitutional rights. Folks, I hope you spread the word. Tell your friends. Go watch this video over to McBride Attorneys Law Show YouTube channel for as long as we're still on YouTube. Go over to the American Freedom Information Center Facebook group. That is the home of the American Freedom Information Institute, our 501c4 nonprofit that has just been formed. You can go check us out at amfreedomii.com. We're working on getting a web page stood up right now. We are acting very quickly to alert people about freedom issues. We would love to hear from you. Reach out to me. I'm Shawn McBride, corporate attorney in multiple states. LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. You can also reach me at Facebook. We are building a community of patriots that want to hold our government accountable, protect and defend our Constitution, put the government back within constitutional limits. We would love to have you, your friends, everybody you know involved in our movement. And it's critical that we all get the word out there. So share this video. Tell people the Constitution has been burned. Show how egregious it's getting. And then let's take the power back to the government and tell them that they've stolen our power. They have literally burned our Constitution. It's getting little to no media attention. It is getting downright blatant. I gave you analysis of why this is such a terrible action. And it's time we take action to end this. Looking forward to viewing your comments, folks. Thanks for tuning in and paying attention to such an important issue. There's still a window of opportunity here to fight back and get our government back within the Constitution and perhaps protect the America that many of us have grown up, that we love. I want the old America back. I want us organized. I want us within the Constitution. I want us helping each other protect our blessings of liberty. And I want us to be able to protect and defend ourselves from other nations. And now is the time that we protect our Constitution and get back to that. If we don't, we are losing a tremendous opportunity, and it is a very scary future. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks for spreading the word, telling folks that's the most important thing you can do. And go on over and get with us at American Freedom Information Center. Get on our email list, and we'll keep fighting forward. Thanks for joining me today.